Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to give your images the look of a shallow depth of field where we have this nice background blur in the distance here with a sharp subject. And normally you'd achieve this effect in camera by using a wide aperture of f2.8 or f4, but if I flip to my start image here, an aperture of f4 was actually used to capture this image. But we've still managed to record lots of detail in the background. This is because a wide angle lens was used, and the wider the angle of the lens, the greater the depth of field. So what I'm going to do is recreate the look of a shallow depth of field using Photoshop's blur filters. And I'm actually going to vary the strength of these filters over different areas of the image to create the characteristic fall off that you'd see with a shallow depth of field. So the blur in the distance will be stronger than the blur closer to the sharp point, which will be on the face of the model here. And then, after applying the blur, I'm just going to also use a couple of adjustment layers to tweak the tones to add a bit of punch and end up with an image that looks like this. So I'm going to start with my blurred_before.jpg file, and I'm going to access my layers panel by going to Window, Layers. Now I'm going to apply different blur strengths on different layers. So I'm going to start by duplicating my background layer 4 times by using the keyboard shortcut Command or Control and J. That's Command J on a Mac and Control J on a PC. So I'm just going to hit that 4 times, and you can see I have my background layer with 4 copies. Next, I'm going to select the part of the image that I want to keep sharp, and I'm going to do this using the Quick Selection tool, which you'll find up here in the toolbar. And I'm going to paint over the figure here with the tool, and you'll see how it does a pretty good job of snapping onto the edge of the figure. If the tool goes wrong at all, you can always hold Alt and paint, and that will subtract areas. So you can see we picked up some of the tree here, so I can hold Alt and paint to subtract that area and refine the edge of the selection like this. So I'm just going to continue painting over the figure to get an accurate selection. And again, I can hold Alt and paint to subtract areas. So I'm going to come back to you when I finish this selection. Okay, so you can see here I've spent a few seconds just improving the edge of that selection. And I've chosen to exclude the feet from this selection because they're actually fairly close to the camera, so I'm going to keep those soft. Now at the moment my selection is very hard edged, but I can improve it by using Refine Edge, which you can find up here in the toolbar, or you can go to Select, Refine Edge. I'm going to set Smooth to 10 and Feather to 0.5, and we'll leave Contract Expand at 0 and hit OK. And that will just give me a smoother, softer edge to the selection. Now, I also want to select parts of the image that are the same distance from the camera as the girl here, because this will be my plane of focus. So I'm going to grab the Selection Brush tool for this, and you can see up here in the options I have Mode set to Mask, which gives me this pink overlay. And I also have Add to Selection checked up here, and then I can simply paint to add areas to my selection. I can use the left and right square bracket keys to change my brush size, and I can also choose a soft-edged circular brush tip. Something like that one there I think will work well. And let's just up the size a bit, and then I'm just going to paint across the image like this to add these areas into my plane of focus. And I think something like that is going to work well. Next, I'm going to convert this selection to a layer mask, and I can do that simply by clicking the Add Layer Mask icon here at the bottom of the Layers panel. And you'll see now we have a layer mask attached to that layer where any areas in black are hidden and the white areas are revealed. And if I just turn off all the other layers, you can see the effect that has where we've isolated this area here. And as I say, this will be our sharp plane of focus with the rest of the image blurred in different ways. So let's start by adding that blur now. So I'm going to reveal all my layers below and then highlight the second from top layer. And we'll double click the layer name and call it Blur 1.5px. Then I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And you can see I have radius set to 1.5 pixels. And if I just hold my mouse button down over the preview window here, you can see the before and after of that blur effect. So it's a pretty subtle blur this layer, and I'm going to hit OK to apply that. Next, I'm going to hold Alt and click the Add Layer Mask icon here again, and that will give me a full black mask that completely hides that blurred layer. I can then grab the brush tool and I'll set my foreground color to white. And I'll choose a soft edge circular brush tip, and then I'm going to paint over the tree here to reveal the blur effect. So I'm going for a subtle blur around the areas that are fairly close to my sharp plane of focus, which is the girl here and this area here along the ground. So I'm going to reveal this subtle blur around areas that are close to that area. So you can see over the tree here, and maybe this area over here. And you can see on my mask where I've painted. In fact, I can hold Alt and click on the mask thumbnail here to give me a view of the mask. I can use that to just clean up any areas that I've missed, like this. And then I can Alt-click the mask thumbnail again to bring me back to the view of the image. And I'm obviously being really quick here about painting, but you can be a little more precise if you need to. Now, if I just zoom in closely using Command or Control and plus, you can see if I toggle that first blur layer on and off, how we've created subtle blur on the tree, just like that. Now let's just hit Command or Control and 0 to go back out to full screen. Next, I'm going to highlight the layer below, and we'll call this layer Blur 3px. And of course, we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur again, and this time enter a radius of 3 pixels and hit OK to add a stronger level of blur. And again, I'm going to Alt-click the Add Layer Mask icon to give me a full black mask that hides that Blur 3px layer. And once again, grab the brush tool and use white to paint over areas of the image. And this time, I'm going to paint over areas in the middle distance, like the grass here, just to reveal that stronger blur over these areas. If I just zoom in closer, you can see how that's working pretty well. Then, I'm going to highlight the layer below and call this layer Blur 6px. And again, let's go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and this time enter 6 pixels and hit OK. We don't need to bother masking this layer because it sits below all our other layers, so we're just going to use this layer to blur any areas of the image that are still sharp in the background. And then finally, I'm going to use a couple of adjustment layers to boost the tones. So I'm going to highlight the top layer, then click the Create Adjustment Layer icon, and I'm going to choose Brightness Contrast. And I'll set brightness to 6 and contrast 12, just to add a little bit more punch. Then I'm going to add a hue saturation adjustment layer, and I'm just going to pump up the saturation slightly, and we'll bring that up to about +7. And that's the finished effect. Let's just take a quick look back through our layers here. So we started off with our sharp background, and then we selected the figure and the plane of the focus that we kept sharp. Then we created blur at different strengths on different layers using layer masks to restrict the blur to different areas of the image to come up with our shallow plane of focus. And finally, we used a couple of adjustment layers to boost the tones. And that's it. Thanks for watching.